My name is Lyra Hale, 29 years old. I knew something was wrong the second the pilot scanned my ID. His expression froze like a man who'd just seen a ghost. Then the screen in his cockpit flashed blood red. An alarm blared through the cabin, sharp and metallic, and 4 words appeared in harsh military font across the display. Alert Admiral Ghost, maximum security. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, outside on the runway, 2 F-22 Raptors rolled into view, engines screaming, their silver bodies gleaming in the Florida sun as they took position on either side of the jet. Beside me, Daniel's father, the same man who had spent the entire morning treating me like dirt on his shoe, stood with his jaw hanging open. Richard Dawson, king of condos and country clubs, looked suddenly very, very small. "Ma'am," the pilot stammered, voice cracking as he turned back to me, "your protection detail is ready." Richard snapped his head toward him. "You mean me." The pilot shook his head so quickly it looked painful. "No, sir. Her." I stood, calm and quiet, the way I'd stood 1,000 times when protocol shifted the shape of a room. The pilot handed me back my ID with both hands, like it was something sacred instead of the worn plastic I'd carried for years. "Your protection detail is ready, Admiral Ghost," he repeated. Outside, the F-22s idled beside the jet like silent predators, heat shimmer rippling off their wings, ready to slice the sky at a moment's notice. Richard stared at them, then at me, then at the pilot. "Admiral what?" he choked. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't have a single instruction to give. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be standing on a runway beside a billionaire-level private jet while 2 Raptors spun up as my personal escort, I would have laughed. I'd always believed life's biggest moments weren't the flashy ones. They were the quiet ones, the ones no one sees, the ones that shape you in silence. But life has a cruel sense of humor. It takes what you've kept hidden and drags it out into the light. That morning had started like any other humid Florida Saturday. Warm air drifted between the palms. Somewhere, a sprinkler ticked on in perfect suburban rhythm. Daniel, my fiancé, had just finished a 24-hour shift at the rescue station. At 6:02 a.m., my phone buzzed with his name. "Dad wants to talk wedding venues today. Can you go with him for me?" I stared at the text for a long second, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Richard Dawson had made it painfully clear from the first handshake that he didn't think I belonged anywhere near his family. Maybe it was because he came from money. Real money. Old money, stacked on new. Florida properties, yachts, keys to country clubs with gates as tall as pine trees, and rules written in invisible ink. Or maybe it was simpler. Some people liked their soldiers on TV, not in their living rooms. Still, Daniel had been raised to respect his parents, even when they didn't earn it. So had I. "Sure," I typed. "I'll go. Get some sleep." Richard pulled up in the spotless black SUV at precisely 8:20 a.m. Not a minute early, not a minute late. The car looked like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. He didn't get out. Didn't even glance up when I opened the passenger door. "You're late," he said, still staring at his phone. It was 7:59. I buckled my seatbelt without comment. My Navy years had taught me that you don't waste energy correcting people who need to be wrong to feel powerful. We drove in silence for a while, the highway unfurling beneath us. He drove the way he lived, sharp, abrupt, always signaling to the world that he was important. Halfway to the airport, he finally looked at me. He let his eyes travel from my hair to my shoes, slow and assessing. "At least you dressed decently today," he said. "My son deserves a woman with a little class." The words slid over me like water over armor. I folded my hands in my lap and watched the palm trees blur past the window. Staying calm was a choice. I'd made it in far worse circumstances than this. When we arrived at the private aviation terminal, one of Richard's employees practically jogged to open his door and take his bags. Richard strode ahead without waiting, assuming I would follow. The jet on the tarmac shimmered like polished pearl. Its fuselage reflected the sky in clean, expensive lines, the kind of plane only CEOs, politicians, and men like Richard could afford to charter regularly. Inside, the cabin smelled like leather and citrus cleaner. Richard dropped into one of the wide recliners, already barking at someone over the phone about closing the Naples deal and people who don't understand money. As I stepped fully into the cabin, he shot me a hard look. "This isn't Coach," he snapped, loud enough for the flight attendant to hear. "Don't touch anything." Heat crept up my neck, but I just nodded once and took the small jump seat near the galley. Humility over argument. Let him talk. People reveal themselves more clearly when you let their mouths outrun their judgment. The crew began pre-flight checks. Outside, ground staff moved like ants around the gleaming body of the jet. Inside, Richard's voice droned on. Numbers, acquisitions, men he insulted from the safety of his first-class leather. I thought of Daniel. Steady, kind, the type who would stay late after a shift to check one more patient. I sometimes wondered how a man like that came from a man like this. 10 minutes later, the pilot stepped out of the cockpit with a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Mr. Dawson," he said, "before departure, I need to run her identification through the clearance system. Standard protocol for certain flight paths today." Richard rolled his eyes so hard I could almost hear it. "She's nobody," he said. "Just do your job." I swallowed the sting and reached into my pocket. My ID card was worn from years of travel, edges soft, name slightly faded but still legible. I handed it over without a word. The pilot took exactly 2 steps toward the cockpit before he froze. It was subtle, just a tightening of his shoulders, a hitch in his breathing, but I noticed. His grip on the plastic shifted like it had suddenly gained weight. He disappeared into the cockpit. The door didn't latch completely. Through the narrow gap, I heard it, a sharp electronic beep, then a harsher alarm, then the screen lighting up in violent red. Richard sat up straighter. "What's that noise?" Before I could answer, the pilot reappeared. His face had gone pale as paper. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling slightly, "I need you to step forward." Richard scoffed and jerked his chin at himself. "You mean me?" "No, sir," the pilot said quickly. Her. I stood, smoothing my civilian clothes with one hand, moving like my body remembered another life. The pilot handed my ID back with both hands, fingers careful, reverent. "Your protection detail is ready, Admiral Ghost," he said. Richard blinked. "Admiral what?" Outside, 2 F-22 Raptors rolled into position beside the jet, engines rumbling like thunder caged in steel. For a full 10 seconds, Richard Dawson, the man who never shut up, didn't say a word. His eyes bounced between the window, the pilot, and my face like he was seeing all 3 for the first time. Finally, he managed to choke out, "This is some kind of joke, right?" The pilot shook his head, almost in awe. "No, sir. This is a federal-level designation. I've never even seen this one before. Admiral Ghost is an extremely restricted naval intelligence marker." Richard looked at me, like the woman he'd insulted all morning had suddenly turned into something dangerous, something powerful, something far beyond his control. I didn't say a word. I just gave the pilot a small nod. Permission to continue. He disappeared into the cockpit and the engines roared to life. The F-22s began to taxi in perfect formation, one on either side. Richard stumbled over to me, pointing an unsteady finger. What? What exactly are you?" Everyone eventually asked that question. Some whispered it, some demanded it, like they were entitled to an answer. I met his eyes, my expression calm, unreadable. And I said nothing at all. The jet lurched forward, rolling down the runway with a force that pushed us both back into our seats. Richard grabbed the armrests like a man bracing for impact, while I simply adjusted my posture, letting muscle memory take over. I'd ridden in jets under far worse circumstances. Takeoff wasn't what scared me. What scared me was the way Richard kept staring. Not at the jet, not at the runway, but at me, as if I had suddenly become a stranger. Outside, the Raptors thundered alongside us, their sleek bodies shimmering in the morning light. When the jet lifted into the air, they rose with us in perfect synchronized arcs, slicing upward into a brilliant blue sky. Richard swallowed hard. Why are we flying with fighter jets?" "It's protocol," I said quietly. He snapped his head toward me. "Protocol for what? Who are you?" Before I could answer, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Mr. Dawson, please remain seated. Escort formation is locked. We are cleared to ascend to 38,000 feet. Richard sputtered. "I'm not staying seated until someone tells me what the hell is happening." The cockpit door opened. The pilot stepped out, but this time his posture had changed. He wasn't casual or hurried. He stood like a man reporting to a superior officer. "Ma'am," he said, addressing me directly, "NORAD has confirmed your clearance level. They request confirmation of your final destination so ground teams can adjust coverage." Richard's mouth dropped open. Ground teams? "Yes, sir," the pilot said, though he still didn't look at him. "Standard for this designation." I exhaled slowly. "Tell them to stand down until further notice." "Yes, ma'am." The pilot snapped a crisp nod and disappeared back into the cockpit. The cabin fell into a heavy, stunned silence. Richard stared at me like I had become a riddle he suddenly needed to solve. What exactly are you? He repeated, but this time quieter, less angry, more afraid. I took a sip of water, steady and deliberate. It's just a clearance status. That's not an answer, he snapped, regaining some of his bark. Did you hide this from my son? From Daniel? I didn't hide anything, I said calmly. He knows who I am. He clearly doesn't know this. Richard gestured wildly toward the window, where a raptor glided silently beside us, close enough that we could see the pilot turning his helmeted head toward our jet. No, I agreed. He doesn't know everything, because he doesn't need to carry it. Richard blinked, thrown off balance. Men like him weren't used to ambiguity. They built their worlds on concrete answers, predictable profits, and the belief that money could reveal any truth worth knowing. He leaned forward. Do you work in Washington? No. Are you some kind of spy? He demanded. I almost smiled. It's never as glamorous as movies make it seem. Then what is Admiral Ghost? He pressed. Some kind of code name? I held his gaze. A designation, not a rank. What does it mean? He growled. That I've been involved in operations that require a level of anonymity most people will never understand, I said. He went still. The hum of the engines filled the silence. You're telling me, Richard said slowly, that for the last 2 years I've been calling you classless, unrefined, ordinary, while you were, what, escorting presidents, running black ops, saving the world. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't say any of that. But you didn't deny it, he said. I didn't respond. The truth had edges that could cut both of us. He rubbed his temples, struggling to reconcile the image he had created of me with the one unfolding in front of him. You know, he said finally, voice bitter, I always thought people joined the military because they didn't have better options. Some do, I replied. And you? I joined because someone needed to, he frowned. Needed for what? I looked out the window. Clouds stretched in soft white layers beneath us. Not every form of service is visible, I said softly. Not every sacrifice gets a medal. The answer shook him more than the turbulence ever could. After a moment, he cleared his throat. So you're telling me my son is marrying someone who commands fighter jets? I don't command them, I said. They follow protocol. Because of you. Because of the designation, I corrected. He stared at me a long time, jaw twitching. That's not normal, he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. A pocket of turbulence hit then. A mild bump. Nothing dangerous. Richard yelped and clutched the armrests again, while I reached instinctively to steady my water glass. He noticed. You're awfully calm, he muttered. I've seen worse. He swallowed. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The tension hung between us like an electrical charge, humming with things unspoken. Then Richard's voice softened in a way I hadn't heard before. Have you ever lost someone? He asked. The question didn't hit my ears. It hit my bones. Yes, I said quietly. He exhaled, heavy, respectful, the kind of breath someone takes when they realize there are worlds behind a person's eyes they never bothered to see. He looked down at his hands. I thought quiet meant weak, he admitted. When Daniel brought you home, I didn't think you could handle our world. Business, pressure, the things that come with our name. And now, I asked? And now? He shook his head. Now I realize you're the strongest person I've ever been in a room with. A strange stillness settled between us. Not tension, not rivalry. Recognition. But the world doesn't let revelations linger. The intercom chimed sharply. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, tighter than before. Ma'am, we've received a distress alert from a nearby civilian aircraft. Electrical malfunction. They're requesting guidance. Richard jolted upright. Guidance? From who? Why us? I unbuckled my seatbelt. He panicked. Where are you going? Don't leave me alone. I stood steady and unhurried. I'm going to the cockpit. Why? What are you going to do? He demanded. I paused in the aisle, turned back, and met his eyes. Something useful. Then I walked towards the cockpit door as the F-22s outside shifted formation, their shadows sliding over our windows like silent guardians. The cockpit door wasn't fully closed. Protocol never allowed it to lock fully midair. But when I stepped inside, the air felt different. Dense. Focused. A kind of pressure I hadn't felt since my intelligence days, when a single decision could tilt the outcome of a mission halfway around the world. The pilot and co-pilot were hunched over their consoles, voices taut as they communicated with ATC. Static crackled. Warning lights pulsed across their panels like a heartbeat gone wrong. The pilot turned when he sensed me, relief flickering through his features. Ma'am, The distressed aircraft reports multiple failures. Navigation unreliable, autopilot offline, inconsistent altitude readings. Behind me, Richard hovered in the doorway, pale and wide-eyed. What do you mean, offline? We can't. What if they crash into us? They won't, I said without looking back. The pilot handed me a headset with both hands. Formal, respectful, like passing a torch. They're losing control, he murmured. They asked if anyone aboard has advanced communication or navigation training. I slipped on the headset. Patch me through. The co-pilot hit a switch. A shaky voice broke through the static. Charter 79 Delta, losing instruments, airspeed bouncing, horizon indicator unreliable. My body went still in the way it always had when chaos approached. Not rigid, not tense, just acutely present. Focus sharpened everything. The tremor in the pilot's voice, the faint echo of multiple alarms, the pressure shifting subtly as our own jet adjusted altitude. This is Admiral Ghost, I said, voice steady and clear. Charter 79 Delta, identify your remaining functionals. What do you still have? There was a pause, a breath. Then, engine temp stable. Good. Airspeed flickering between 80 and 160. Copy. Ignore airspeed readings for now. Horizon indicator, unreliable. Expected. Trust the aircraft, not the panel. Richard grabbed the cockpit doorframe, watching like a man seeing the world tilt on its axis. Pitch feels like a slight downward drift, the distressed pilot added. Ease your yoke to neutral. Do not overcorrect, I said firmly. Flying blind means small movements only. Let the aircraft breathe. Yes, ma'am. The co-pilot stared at me like he'd just discovered fire. Outside, one of the F-22 Raptors peeled out of formation and took a sharp, graceful arc downward toward the troubled plane. Nothing but a silver streak against endless blue. The maneuver was so precise, it sent a ripple of awe through the cockpit. Richard whispered behind me, They're following your instructions. I didn't acknowledge him. Charter 7 to 9 Delta, I said. NORAD is guiding a military escort into visual range. Maintain eyes on the fighter. Do not lose visual contact. Repeat, do not. Static. Then, I see them. God, okay, I see them. Good, I said. Match their angle. Slowly. You're not falling. You're flying blind. Now breathe. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a full minute of suspended air and raw human fear. Then, altitude stabilizing, he whispered. Controls responding. I think we've got it. Relief washed through the cockpit like a sigh. Well done, I said softly. Maintain escort shadow until NORAD clears you. You're going to be fine. I set the headset down gently. The pilot exhaled like he'd been underwater. Ma'am, if you ever want a job in civilian aviation, I almost smiled. I'm better in the shadows. When I stepped back into the cabin, Richard was still gripping the headrest in front of him, knuckles white. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He stammered, you just kept a plane from falling out of the sky. I guided them, I corrected. They flew. He shook his head. No, you sounded like a commander, like someone used to people listening when lives are at stake. That's because I am, I said quietly. He sank into the seat across from me, overwhelmed, like a man reassembling the entire world in his mind. For the first time, Richard Dawson wasn't looking at me with disdain. He was looking at me with respect. He rubbed his face with both hands. Daniel never told me anything about this. I didn't tell him, I said gently. His head snapped up. Why not? Because I love him, I said simply, and because it wasn't his burden to carry. Richard swallowed, hard, as if that single sentence rearranged him. I thought you were quiet because you were weak, he admitted, voice raw. But you're quiet because you've lived a life louder than mine will ever be. I didn't answer. Some truths don't need affirmations. Lyra, he said, softer than I'd ever heard. I owe you an apology. I waited. For every insult, every assumption, every moment I made you feel less than what you are. His voice trembled. You are the kind of woman any father should be grateful for. The words hung between us, unexpected, honest, heavy. Thank you, I said quietly. He blinked. That's it? No lecture? No anger? You apologized, I said. You meant it. That's enough. He let out a breath of something like relief or acceptance. Can we start over? He asked. I held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, we can. The cabin filled with a different kind of silence. Not tense, not hostile. Something like peace. Richard leaned back, studying me, not as an adversary, but as someone he needed to understand. Lyra, he said gently, What did you do in the Navy? I exhaled. There's a lot I can't say, I told him, but I can tell you this. I worked in naval intelligence. The real kind. The kind that changes lives without anyone knowing your name. He sat still, absorbing every word. My job wasn't combat, I continued, but it was close enough to understand it, close enough to see who didn't come home. Light from the window washed over him as he listened, silently, respectfully. What is Admiral Ghost? He whispered. A code designation, I said. Priority asset. High clearance anonymity. It means when I travel certain routes, protocol activates. And you earned that? I held his gaze. I earned it by standing where others couldn't. He looked out the window with a shaky breath. My God. The intercom chimed again. Beginning descent. Escort will disengage. Richard didn't move. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, human, changed. You know, I thought I understood what mattered in life, he said. But you taught me otherwise. I didn't reply. Some revelations don't need words to settle. The day of our wedding arrived wrapped in golden quiet, the kind of soft Florida morning where the sky looks freshly painted, the breeze is warm but gentle, and everything feels like it's holding its breath for something sacred. Daniel and I had chosen a seaside chapel overlooking the water. Nothing extravagant, nothing dramatic, just a simple place where waves rolled close enough to hear and sunlight spilled through stained glass windows like spilled honey. After years of missions, coded orders, and lives lived between shadows, this was the kind of day I once thought I'd never have, a day that belonged entirely to peace. I stood just outside the chapel, bouquet in hand, listening to the distant hum of musicians warming up. My dress wasn't some towering statement of lace. It was elegant, simple, and honest, like the life Daniel and I wanted to build. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Richard Dawson stood a few paces away, dressed in a navy suit that matched the water behind him. But more striking than his attire was the expression on his face. Not arrogance, not dominance, not calculation, but humility, and something dangerously close to pride. May I? He asked softly, gesturing toward my bouquet. I handed it to him. He adjusted a single ribbon, a small gesture, but somehow intimate, then returned it with a nod. You look beautiful, he said, his voice steady for once. Thank you, I replied. We stood there together, a silence stretching between us that didn't feel hostile or forced. Just real. I've been thinking a lot about that day, Richard said quietly. About the jet. About what you did. About who you are. I said nothing. Let him speak. I said some ugly things before. Judgmental. Unfair. He swallowed. I assumed you didn't belong in this family. But I was wrong. Emotion tightened his voice in a way I don't think he was used to. Lyra, I'm proud Daniel chose you, and I'm grateful for the life he'll have because of you. Not Admiral Ghost. You. My throat tightened. Thank you, Richard, I whispered. That means more than you know. He took a small breath, then extended his arm. I'd like to walk you in, he said, if you'll let me. I paused, not out of doubt, but out of respect for the weight of the moment, for everything that had changed between us, for everything that hadn't. Then I slipped my hand into his arm. I'd like that, I said. The chapel doors opened. Music floated out. And as I walked down the aisle with Richard beside me, I saw Daniel standing at the front, eyes shining, hands clasped together like he was afraid if he blinked I'd disappear. His smile, warm, steady, overflowing with love, felt like the safest place I'd ever been. Richard placed my hand into Daniel's, whispering with a shaky breath, "Take care of her." Daniel smiled. Oh, always. The ceremony unfolded like a quiet tide. Promises spoken soft but certain, rings exchanged with trembling fingers, a kiss under sunlit glass, applause rising like a warm wave. It wasn't a spectacle, it wasn't meant to be. It was the day we chose each other, not out of expectation or obligation, but out of truth. At the reception, the room glowed with soft amber light and clinking glasses. People laughed, toasted, embraced. Daniel and I danced to a slow song played too softly for the extroverts, but perfect for us. Then Richard stood and tapped his glass. I expected a short toast, polite, reserved, something about family or property values. But when he cleared his throat, the room fell still immediately. If you know me, he began, voice carrying across the tables, you know I've spent most of my life thinking success meant money, influence, status, the kind of things you can show off in a brochure. Quiet laughter rippled through the room. But recently, he continued, someone showed me that real strength isn't loud. It isn't flashy. Real strength is quiet. steady, humble. He turned to me. I misjudged my daughter-in-law, he said, voice thick. I judged her by what I could see, not by what she lived, and I couldn't have been more wrong. The room held its breath. I want her to know that I see her now, truly. He raised his glass. To the bravest woman I've ever met, welcome to the family. The applause started soft, then grew, warm and full, rising like something healing. Daniel squeezed my hand until it hurt. My eyes stung, because in that moment, something closed and something opened. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing what to carry forward and what to leave behind. Later that evening, after the guests drifted away and the sky turned lavender over the water, I stepped outside for air. The shoreline glowed in the last scraps of sunset, waves catching enough light to shimmer like molten silver. Daniel slipped his arms around my waist. You okay? He murmured. I leaned into him. More than okay. I saw you talking with my dad earlier, he said gently. Everything all right? I smiled. Better than all right? He kissed my cheek. We stood there, listening to the soft hush of the waves, the music now muffled behind chapel walls. You know, he said quietly, you never have to tell me everything. I love you for who you are, not what you've done. That, more than anything, meant everything. We all have chapters that made us who we are, I said. Some stay closed for a reason. And I'm okay with that, he whispered. We watched the last sliver of sun dip into the horizon, wrapped in a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes after storms, after service, after secrets, after letting go. Service is sacrifice. Love is healing. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, lets us move forward. And if there's one lesson I want to leave in the air tonight, it's this. Never judge a person by the part of their story you can see. Some heroes walk quietly among us. Some storms they carry alone. Some chapters remain classified, and that's okay. Because what matters most is the life they choose to build next.